This is The Express with Gary Allen, your 360-degree view of the world. Now, here's your host, Gary Allen.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to The Express, and happy pre-4th of July. Hope everybody's having a good time. Looking forward to this weekend when we celebrate the birth of our country, and hope everybody's going to have a good one. And please remember that our freedoms were given to us by the hard men and women who fought for this country, and some who died for this country as well. So the next time you see a vet, please thank them so much for their military service, as well as the sacrifice that they made and their comrades made along the way as well. But welcome to The Express, and tonight's edition of The Express, we have a interesting guest coming on in just a little bit, but I just want to remind everyone, next week's guest will be Mark Viola. We'll be talking headlines, and probably 10 to 1, we'll probably be discussing what happened with the Supreme Court in the last couple of weeks. But our guest tonight is Mr. Seth Greenky. Also, too, I just want to remind you, if you want to go ahead on Facebook and friend me, you're more than welcome to. That's Gary Allen, A-L-A-N, at The Express. Also, too, if you have any questions for tonight's guest, Mr. Greenky, who is a manager in the show business community, please go on to the chat room, type in what you want to ask, and EW will pass that along to us along the way. I know Seth is standing by, but let me just give you a quick little brief history of Seth. Seth was with us once before, Mr. Seth Greenky, who lives in Manhattan. He's been a full-time personal manager for over 25 years, and he's been a member of the National Conference of Personal Managers since 1987. In 2003, Seth had the honor of being elected into the NCOPM's East Coast Board of Directors. He is now representing actors in the film and television industry. Some of Seth's clients include Emmy Award winners, 2 other Emmy nominees, and a Broadway star, as well as a Miss Universe and Miss Russia, which is something interesting, and an R&B legends along the way. He also is written a number of in columns and publications throughout New York, backstage, where he had a column called Ask a Manager column. And I am pleased to say that Seth the Greenky is also one of my dear friends in the whole wide world. And before I get to that, Seth, because I know you're there, I just want to pay my condolences to the late Jack Carter, who passed away this week, one of the great comedians of all time. Ooh. And he passed away at the age of 93 years old, and he was always funny. I did not get to meet him, but he was funny nevertheless. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Seth Greenky. Seth, good evening.
Hello, and how are you?
I'm fine, and I know you're here under the weather. He's not feeling well, and that's a terrible thing to happen to you as we head into the 4th of July weekend. So I presume you'll probably go to the doctor and have some kind of medication given to you. That's a good way to spend the 4th of July weekend, heavily medicated.
Well, good luck finding a doctor on the holiday week.
Yeah, that's absolutely, sir. As I said, go ahead.
I was going to say that was kind of shocking news about Jack Carter.
Yes. He was a comedian who performed in the Catskills, probably along with a lot of other people like Buddy Hackett, who got their start. And, of course, you have a connection to the Catskills, and we were talking about it on the phone just yesterday, and we'll get to that as we move down the line. But, yes, Jack was part of a generation of comedians that performed. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with the Catskills, it was sort of a resort hotel community in the upper mountains. So how far out of New York City was the Catskills, Seth?
Depending on where you lived, between 90 to 100, and depending upon where the hotel you chose to stay at. So, 90, 100, thereabouts.
Yeah, and that was a place where people could go in the summertime and really enjoy some great comedy. This was long before Las Vegas became what it was, and Miami Beach was still a fledgling place for performers to perform. But the Catskills was where a lot of performers that we know of, like Sammy Davis Jr. and his family, as well as Jack Carter and Bob Hope and Bing Crosby and others of that generation, probably went and learned their craft. And it was sort of an offshoot of vaudeville in a way.
Very much so. And one of the reasons the Catskills became what they did, with approximately 1,100 different hotels of varying sizes, through the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. Of course, it started earlier when people who had a business in Brooklyn and they became a little bit prosperous, they would go up and they'd buy a farmhouse, a small little place where They could have their kids and their wife go up for the weekend, for the summer, and they would work in the city. Whether it was usually a small business of furriers or something in the garment industry, people who lived in Brooklyn, and it was before the advent of widespread air conditioning, and even in the early days when there was no air conditioning, people wanted to have a cool place to go, at least for their families. So it started off so people would buy a farmhouse up there, and then they would invite friends, and the friends would have guests come up, and they said, "Hey, this might be a business," and they would start renting rooms out. And then as they got more successful, they would start adding on or building a separate building, and sometimes give up their New York business because their seasonal business became so lucrative.
Yeah, and again, that's where a lot of performers were really honed their craft and really did very well. And there was a play or a show on Broadway not that many years ago, Catskills on Broadway, I believe. I'm trying to remember the gentleman who put that together, but I can't. His name escapes me at the moment, but I know that was on Broadway for a number of years, or traveling around the tri-state area up there in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area. And I imagine it was absolutely fabulous. I know my Uncle Tubby used to talk about the Catskills. And, before there was air conditioning, that's where people went, and they found it was cooler, and it was a lot easier to enjoy life up that way. You've been in the management business for over 25 years. Has show business always been in your blood since you were a little guy?
Well, from the time I was 3, I was begging my mom to get me a piano. It was the first thing I asked for in the morning, and the last thing I told her before she put me to bed at night. I wanted her to know that I was serious. So after 4 years of my doing that twice a day, she finally got the piano when I was 7.
Yeah.
And I started taking lessons, and by the time I was 12, I was fairly proficient on 8 different instruments.
Really?
From there, yeah.
What other instruments?
Piano, trumpet, drums, guitar, bass, vibes, organ, and vibraphone.
Self-taught, or I know you took lessons for the piano, but after you learned the piano, was that just?
I took lessons. I took lessons on piano, guitar, believe it or not, bongo drums, regular drums, the upright bass, and the rest were easily self-taught after that. The thing I don't play is woodwinds.
Well, we all have a crutch to bear, Maybe there's time.
My brother played saxophone.
Oh, okay. Well, by the way, one of the great all-time bass players, the anniversary of his passing was this past week, and that's Mr. Thistlethwaite from the group The Who, who I admired a great deal, one of the great bass players of all time. Which instrument did you enjoy the most? Piano, the bass? What did you enjoy the most?
I'd say I was mostly a keyboard man, but I enjoyed playing guitar. Later on, I joined some bands. I was in a band in high school, of course. And then as I went to college, I would play in the Catskills during the summer. Our rock bands played at some of the nicer hotels up there. And we would always get a chance to see the comedians or somebody like Sammy Davis. And I'm sure I saw Jack Carter probably a half a dozen times during the years while I was up there.
Well, he was just a great giant of all times. Now, a story that I know about you that you talked about the first time you were on with us. You played in a lot of different rock and roll bands, but you also had an opportunity at one time to join the Eat Street Band, and that's the Boss. How did that come about, and what happened that you didn't join?
Well, you're slightly inaccurate. They had the opportunity to have me. And it was prior to the E Street Band. It was the band prior to Steel Mill. And the way that came about was very innocently. I was going to college at Monmouth, and Bruce was already a one-name local star. all you had to do was say Bruce. People knew who you were talking about.
Yeah.
Record companies were already sniffing around him and trying to throw money at him. So he was a very well-known person in the community, and beyond, of course. But it was before he had his first record. So one day I was at my friend's recording studio that was located in Belmar, New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, for the time, it was pretty state-of-the-art. It was an 8-track recording studio, not to be confused with an 8-track that would go in a car in the 1970s.
No.
You had the opportunity to record maybe 8 different instruments, one at a time, or have a band play at the same time, and you could put 3 or 4 microphones on the drums. You could have the drums left and right, and then you could do the same thing with the piano. You could have the low end with one mic,
mm-hmm.
and the high end with another. Put a guitar on, then you could leave the spot open, come back after you're done recording a song, and then you'd have a spot in which to plug in your lead guitar. And then you'd have your vocal tracks. So one day I was there recording a few of my own original songs, and I was flitting about. I would first lay down the keyboard, and from then I would go and pick up the bass and lay down the bass, and then I'd go sit on the drums and I'd play the drums because I'd set the tempo, and then I'd play guitar, and then I'd go over and I'd hit the organ, and then I'd go over on another pass-through and I'd play the vibes, and then when I was done putting the music together, then I would lay my vocals on top of everything, and then I could even sing harmony to myself. So during this session, I noticed somebody had stepped into the control room while I was doing my musical thing. So just as I was about to leave the studio, I'd finished what I wanted to do. This guy tapped me on the shoulder, and he says, "Excuse me, would you mind playing bass for my girls group that I'm producing? The bass player is not going to show up. Do you think you could do it?" I said, "Well, if you have a chord sheet, sure." So I recorded 2 or 3 songs for him, and then I was about to leave again. And just before I got to the door, he said to me, "Hey, I'm in a band, and it's with Bruce." And he said, "You know who I mean when I say Bruce, don't you? You know, very serious." And I said, "Sure, yeah." He said, "Would you like to audition to be our new bass player? We're looking for a new bass player." So I said to him, "Well, okay." Now, he didn't know that I knew bass well enough to record myself, but I didn't consider myself a top-rung bass player. But I knew a couple of fancy bass runs, and I was decent enough. Mm-hmm. And I learned these runs from our record producer when my band was going to be on Atlantic Records, and our producer, he taught me a couple of things. So I said, "Sure." And he said, "Well, can you come to this house in Asbury Park or Neptune, New Jersey?" I forgot where it was. And I said, "Sure, I'll be there tomorrow." "What time?" He said, "Okay." So next day I went over there with a borrowed bass because I didn't have one of my own. And the door opened, and the drummer greeted me. He says, "Come on in, we're waiting for you." And as I walked into the room, the front door, the living room was filled with what Jimi Hendrix would say purple haze. Ah. And it was so thick that I couldn't see to the other side of the room. And mind you, during this time, when everybody was into getting stoned and whatnot, I was very much anti-drug, and which included pot. And today, when kids say, "It's just pot, just weed," but back then, you could get some serious jail time, and it was considered risky to be involved in that. But it was, rebellion,
right?
And that's what musicians did. But I wasn't one of them. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't until I got halfway across the room when I saw Bruce leaning up against the wall. Meantime, I'm trying to hold my breath as long as possible and just inhale from inside my shirt. Mm-hmm. So he said, "Plug in, let's jam." So I played a couple of songs with him, throwing in a couple of my fancy runs, and then the drummer came over and said, "Would you mind waiting outside? We want to talk about you." I said, "Sure." I was so glad to get outside when I could finally take a breath, but I had already made my decision. I knew Bruce was going to be huge.
Mm-hmm.
He was great during the jam. He was, and prior to his becoming famous, people didn't know how good his guitar playing skills were. He could be very fast and very clean.
Mm-hmm.
But so people had not had a chance to hear him play, real hard rock. He was close to heavy metal at that time, the way he would play the runs. And the only person I saw at that time that was close was maybe John McLaughlin, who had the Mahavishnu Orchestra. Very fast, very clean, very melodic.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd already made up my mind. So a couple of minutes later, the drummer came outside and said, Bruce digs you, you're in. And I just said to him, no thanks. And I walked away, and his jaw hit the floor because I don't think anybody ever said no to them.
What was your reason? What was your reason?
I didn't want to be around the pot smoke.
Well, I don't know if
I didn't want to be around drugs.
Well, I guess I can understand that. I guess I don't know if Bruce was. I don't think any of them were ever busted for it that I can think of. I don't remember.
No, rarely did that happen.
Mm-hmm.
Rarely did that happen. There was a private home.
Mm-hmm. Where did
that was not the issue for me. To me, it was just a personal choice.
Oh, all right. Well, when did the? I know that Jack Siegel was a mentor of yours, and he was also Joan Rivers' agent at one time. And so, is that how you got into management?
No, I was into management many, many years before that. When I was 21, I was more into producing other artists. Mm-hmm. And I had a small record company, and I had an office at 1650 Broadway,
mm-hmm.
and where people would knock on the door and ask if they could audition their demos, something I had done for a few years prior to having my own office.
Yeah.
So I started managing musical artists and producing them. Actually, I was producing them first, but sometimes when you're producing an artist or a group,
mm-hmm.
you literally are living with them, rehearsing with them, honing their material. I remember taking this one trip up to Allentown, Pennsylvania, where there was a group that I had signed, and there were no seats on the bus. So I had a 4-hour bus ride where I was sitting in the bathroom because there were no seats on the bus. And every once in a while, somebody would knock on the door and ask if and they go, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, this is the only seat.
Yeah.
You need to get in here." So sometimes they'd have to vacate so they could use the facilities.
Yeah.
So, I'd be up there a few days and I'd be woodshedding with them. So I became a de facto manager of musical artists at that time. And I did that for many years. And I worked for a couple of different record companies, and then I worked for Bell Sound Studios, where
mm-hmm.
I was the house producer. We were located at 237 West 54th Street. And Studio 54 was right outside my window. I could look across the street and there's Studio 54. I never thought that place was such a big thing because I could go in anytime I wanted.
Yeah.
It's because at the time, I was in the music business. I was a producer right across the street. So I had, kind of local status. And there were recording studios. There probably were about 5 recording studios on West 54th, West 55th, between 7th and Broadway and 8th Avenues. So there were a ton of recording studios around at the time.
But if you want to talk about drugs and stuff going on, Studio 54 apparently was the was the Statue of Liberty of drugs and sexual abuse going on in New York, in Manhattan.
Well, you know what? In those days, people would go in the corner. I used to manage a group called the Harlots of 42nd Street. And they had a very heavy downtown following. Matter of fact, Kiss used to be their opening act.
Wow.
So they would play at places like Club 82, places long since gone. They played at Max's Kansas City. And, people would be doing their thing, at their banquettes or in the corners or in the bathrooms.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember Club 82, it was kind of like, for a lot of the patrons, it didn't really matter what gender you were at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a lot of things going on, and a lot of skin being shown, and a lot of personal activities were going on that normally you wouldn't see in a club.
No,
So
no.
those are kind of wild times when I think back about it. The band played had a semi-steady gig at the Continental Bath, and for listeners who are not familiar with that, Continental Bath was where Bette Midler got her start,
Mm-hmm.
and it catered to. It was the first gay disco, or the biggest, located in the Ansonia Hotel down around West 74th Street. And they had a giant swimming pool in the basement, and they had 2 stages and a bar, and it was set up like a fancy nightclub. And then they had
her music,
the anonymous room.
And her musical director was a gentleman who saw a little bit of success, I think, wouldn't you say, in Mr. Barry Manilow?
Yeah, he did okay.
Yeah. I mean, he went on. He's not worried about eating anymore. I did get to see him out in Las Vegas at the Hilton. Then it was called the Hilton. Now it's something else completely different. And what a fantastic show he puts on, a production show. And he probably learned a little bit of that through Beth and his own creativity. But so when did you start? When did you start really getting into actors and performers other than bands and musicians per se? When did actors get involved with you?
I'd say it was about close to 30 years ago, maybe a little less. The music business was contracting a bit. A lot of record companies started buying up other record companies, and there became fewer outlets for people that I'd be producing. So it kind of stopped being fun. And I loved living in the studio and creating, but there were fewer and fewer outlets to place the music with.
Mm-hmm.
So one of my musical artists said to me, "Seth, can you help me get an acting job?" And he had a SAG card, and I said, "I have no idea, but I'm willing to try." So by a process of trial and error, I found out that there were such things called casting directors, and that a producer was different in film and TV than a producer was in records. And they had different functions, although they had the same name. So I learned a whole new nomenclature. There was a whole new world of personnel. The network said there are hundreds of casting directors, and what might be appropriate for a particular client.
Mm-hmm.
And it was around that time when I'd heard of Jack Siegel. I heard about him when my band played up in the Catskills, because he was a legend as a manager at that time. And back then, managers and agents, their terms were more interchangeable, and their duties were more similar and overlapping than they are today.
Mm-hmm.
So Jack, as I later learned, was the first person who booked people up in the Catskills that insisted that his talents be fed and housed. He's the first person to include that in his contracts.
Mm.
Before that time, when you mentioned Joan Rivers, how her career got started was that when Jack would book an act, and he had hundreds of acts, and then besides the hundreds of hotels, there were hundreds of bungalow colonies, which is a small community of people who would live up there in small cottages, and they usually had a large building with a stage, large enough to accommodate, the 50, 100, 150 people that lived at the bungalow colony, and they would have less expensive acts, but there would always be 3 acts booked for a night. You'd have the variety artists, maybe somebody who played musical bottles. Then you'd have the comedian,
mm-hmm.
and then you'd have the legitimate singer, who would, and usually you'd have to have some musicians to back in, because they would bring charts, and it was expected that musicians up there were skilled enough to be able to basically cold read arrangements. And some of those guys were just marvelous. Not having worked with a singer before, looking at the charts, for maybe the second time. They would maybe get in a half-hour rehearsal before the show went on, and they would put on their show. So Jack would book people. Usually he'd book 3 shows a night for a trio of 3, and multiply that times 50. So the reason...
When you say times 50, what are you referring to for those who don't know?
He had about 150, artists that he would book, most every night. So he had 150 people working a night, probably in 50 different places.
Wow.
And so, one group of 3 would travel to a bungalow colony, then another bungalow colony for a medium show, and then maybe a hotel for their third show, so that they could make money. And the money back then was very low. The opening act, you might get $5. The second act might get 10, and the bigger act might get 25. Now, we're not talking about your Sammy Davis Jr.'s and your Jack Carters. We're talking about the people who were getting started on the lower rung, finding themselves. And a lot of those people started that very way, including Joan Rivers and Buddy Hackett. So Jack had a number of artists needing to get up to the Catskills. Joan Rivers had a car. So Joan drove the other guys up there, and she was allowed to then do her show. And at that time, there were very, very few. She might have been the only female comedian. There was Toady Fields at that time, too, if you recall that name.
Oh, yes, very much so.
And so that's how she got started. She was a chauffeur and was given the middle slot.
Where was Jackie? Where was Jackie Moms Mabley at this time, or was she working strictly Southern clubs?
She was doing more of the Chitlin circuit. When you work in the Catskills, it was primarily a Jewish audience, and so there would be a lot of Jewish ethnic humor. Now, actually, I think you're jogging my memory. I think Moms Mabley may have played a couple of the bigger venues because she started to go a little bit more mainstream. But 99.5% of the artists up there would be doing something that had ethnic orientation. I remember the first time I went up there, and some of the smaller places, they'd be telling a joke, and they go, well, the parrot said to the man, I don't want to go. And the man said to the parrot, well, you have to go. And the parrot said, Gay kaka knife and yum. And everybody would burst into laughter because they all knew Yiddish. And my young rock band, we're just all looking at each other going, huh?
Yeah. I will say something like El Dakaka today, or I'll say Meshuggah, something along those lines. And unless you were brought up like I was in South Florida in Miami Beach, and you don't understand Yiddish, it's like you're lost in space,
And we're talking about 2 generations ago when it was much more prevalent.
By the way, for those of you that don't know who I'm talking about, look on YouTube or online for Jackie Moms Mabley. She was one of the funniest ladies in the whole wide world. I had the pleasure of meeting her a few years before she passed away, and she was such a a lady and a half, Seth. I mean, a true lady in every sense of the word, and what a great lady. So if you young people out there, like one of our listeners, Randy, who I know he listens every week, and I thank him for that, look up for Jackie Moms Mabley, and you will laugh if there's any video on her from way back when. Funniest lady I ever saw in my life. Let's move forward here a little bit. Today, you've been in the business for well over 25 years. You have an office in New York City. What does it take for you to sign someone? What sort of skills? Where do they have to be in their craft and in their art for you to be their manager? And what do you do for that artist as their manager?
Okay, just so we're consistent, I've been working with actors for about the last 25 years.
Okay.
Part of that was musicians. I don't want people to get confused. Go, wait a second, where's this calendar going? How is that possible? Time travel?
Well,
so. When I first started out with actors, I didn't know too much, and I still don't know too much. Some people might say, but it's guesswork. But I had the very fortunate exposure this is awkward paraphrasing, awkward. Let's see. Let me see if I can say it better. One of my early clients was a very skilled actor by the name of Vivica Lindfors. She had worked with Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Cagney. She was a leading lady from the 40s and 50s. And she, through a friend, asked if I might help her revive her career a bit. And she had won an Emmy for Best Guest Artist on a TV show around the 1980s or so. So I went to see her she would do a one-woman show. And I got to see the transcendent nature of a truly skilled and gifted artist. So it set my benchmark. And there was a difference between a high school or college performer and a seasoned pro.
Oh, yeah.
So you were asking about Jack Siegel. So I managed to somehow get to meet him. And he asked me if I was in the NCOPM, which is the National Conference of Personal Managers. And I said, no. He said, why not? He was one of the early members, and he was the secretary of the organization. So he almost literally took me under his wing, brought me to a meeting, and got me admitted. And I've been with the organization ever since. Jack worked until he was 98 plus years old. He might have been 99. He wasn't sure which year he was born. And he worked 2 years until he passed away. Yeah. He was down to one or two artists. And may I tell you a funny story about Jack?
Sure, go ahead.
Jack was at one of the meetings, and he was talking with a few other longtime managers. Some, almost everybody was younger than Jack. So Jack was talking about. He said, "I'm not sure. I'm having second thoughts about this artist. I'm not sure if I should sign him because my contract's just 3 years with a 3 option, so it could be a 6-year commitment." And I said, "Jack, is that because you're 95 years old?" He said, "No, it's because he's 60. What kind of career could he have?"
That's funny. That's funny. Did he sign him, by the way?
I believe he did.
Well, what makes you?
Maybe.
Go ahead.
I can't speak truthfully to whether he did sign him or not.
Yeah. Because
he was also pretty discerning.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so I love the attitude.
Yeah, that's funny. That's funny. Well, what kind of an act has to impress you, and where do you find new talent? Do they come to you? Do you find them? And how do you approach them?
Well, most often people send me. It used to be before email and computers and the internet. People would mail or drop off their headshot and resume. Mm-hmm. Now with modern technology, people just email it to you, right, whether you want them to or not. But it's okay. Where else that's where you find it. You get invitations to showcases. They come through the mail or through your email.
Right.
There have been times when an actor has been in an audition and starts talking to one of my clients, and they say, "Who reps you?" And one of my clients recommends me to them, so they call me. Sometimes agents have recommended me to one of their clients to say, you could use a manager. So I've been contacted that way, and I have found people, a person who's gone on to great success who shall remain nameless, I literally discovered in the subway before she'd done anything but be a Corrine in a bus and truck tour of a musical. I'd never been in front of a motion picture camera.
Do you think that the internet has kind of destroyed the personal touch? People coming into your office, you actually get to see them up close and in person, get to talk to them maybe if you find some interest, as compared to somebody sending you something over through an email. I mean, you can look at a resume all you want, but until you really meet the person and really decide for yourself, you think that's been sort of pushed aside? the personal aspect of being a manager?
No, I think it's a great filter. It's a great time saver. People will have their demo reels online. You don't even have to download it. You can click on a link and be taken immediately to see if they've got anything worthwhile when they're trying to act. And then when I see something that strikes my fancy, and I think they've got some talent or potential to have it, I would then call them up and invite them in for a meeting. So this way I don't have to meet with 50 people. I can just wait until after work is done for the day and look through the email and look at some people's demo reels.
Are the stage moms still around?
They probably are. I can't see that as a breed ever going out of fashion, but I don't work with kids.
And even
and that's one of the reasons.
Yeah. Some of them can be pretty strange. What are the conditions upon which, or what are the terms of your contracts with people? I know it's 3 years and 3-year option.
Right. I use the standard NCOPM contract with a couple of addendums and riders that I have found I needed to add through my experience of how people act and behave and don't. But generally, my commission rate is set, and it's some people used to be the standard was 20%, and I've kind of stuck with that. But a person who comes to me with an Emmy nomination in their back pocket, well, then that's negotiable. But if someone's starting out new, they're going to be a lot of work. So I need some incentive. And also, as a manager, I have relatively few clients, and I'm not dealing with hundreds of people and possibilities. I'm dealing with a handful.
Right. Unlike an agent that has a roster of maybe 100 different performers that they can send out for casting calls and et cetera like that. What's your best advice? What's your best advice that you give young people today? Somebody out there listening in that says, "Hey, I've been acting here at home. I want to go to New York. I want to go to L.A. or even Chicago." And I always tell them, don't, unless you have your act together completely, because going there, unless you have a certain degree of ability and a certain degree of being on the boards behind you, you're just wasting your time. Going to L.A., if you don't have your act together, that's no place to go. And even though if you go to New York to one of these acting schools, you still have to have a degree of proficiency and a degree of skill behind you. What do you recommend to young people today?
Well, if they are not in New York or L.A. before they come here, sometimes they have been in every high school production and they've had the lead in every college production in Ohio or Idaho or someplace other than New York or L.A.
Right.
And the level of competition here is so much higher. So that if you've been a big fish in a small pond, you'll barely be a minnow when you get to New York or L.A. But there's always an exception. But you do need to have a resume. You do need to have a reel. Even if you did student films, if you have gone to a film school like a UCLA or an NYU Tisch, and again, they're starting where people know what they're doing.
Right.
Your acting coach in Illinois really doesn't have the finger on the pulse of what's going on in New York and LA, because the auditions that mean anything, and I'm not demeaning anything done out of New York, but it's just the level of competition and the experience that people have is so much more demanding that if you do come to New York, immediately get yourself into a reputable acting school, have an acting coach ready and available in case you do get an audition, that they can work with you that night for the next morning so you can audition the next morning.
Right.
You have so many ducks to get in a row. And a lot of people find out the hard way, and they come here with like $8,000 and they think they're good for a year, and it'll last you about 2 months.
Yeah. I know that in Chicago, where I lived for a number of years, a lot of the cast members from Saturday Night Live, of course, went to Second City, or they went in Los Angeles, where I was a member of the Groundlings for a while. And even in the skill set and the experience of the people that were auditioning for those schools was far superior to anything that I'd ever come across. And yet I managed to get into the Groundlings thanks to Robin Williams. But I mean, I can remember going and watching Second City back then, and watching Chris Farley, a gentleman who I was friends with but no longer. Andy Dick was even there when he was actually very, very good. And many members of the Saturday Night Live cast, like Tina Fey. Of course, that was many years after I was out of Chicago. But, you know, the Tina Fey stories and stuff like that going to New York, she had years of experience behind her. And I know somebody that went to Virginia with her, University of Virginia, and they said she was like a nerd in college. You know, there was show business was in her blood, but she was like a nerd from Philadelphia. And so those stories are far and few. You know, the Jimmy Fallons, I've always believed that God has given certain people gifts to do certain things, and it just, everything kind of comes together. And I also remember a story by William Shatner that he said, when, you know, you can take two actors that come to Hollywood, both skilled, both experienced, both well-gifted actors, but one has one or two more connections than the other, and that's why someone makes it. If your connections are good, you can get there, but you better hope your connections have connections as well. And I think that's also a trap that young actors get into. Oh, well, I have a connection in New York. Well, good. I hope that connection has a connection for you as well.
And that you better be able to pull off your show so you don't embarrass your connection.
Yeah, yeah. You know, it's like the old saying about. Yeah, that's like the old saying, well, having a famous mother or father in the business or relative, does that help you? Yeah, but when you get on the other side of that door, you better be ready to hit the ground running, because they're not going to tolerate you any more than they do anybody else.
You have to deliver.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, let me ask you a question. You mentioned
Sure.
you and Robin Williams. Would you
Yes.
like to, I don't know if that's a story you've told many times or that the audience might like to hear it, but I would.
I've told it a few times, but yeah, I was out in Los Angeles, and I used to MC at the Improv every once in a while for Bud Friedman back in the day. And I got to meet Robin over a period of years. I wasn't as close a friend to him as, say, Rick Overton was, or some of the other guys. Saget was also extremely close to him, and Bob has been a friend of mine for a while. He used to come into the Improv a lot during the afternoons and sit around when he wasn't doing anything and joke and kid with other comics that would be there. The name Marsha Warfield probably rings a bell with you. She did Night Court.
Sure.
Harry Anderson used to hang out there as well. And so did a lot of other actors and stuff that have gone on to great fame and fortune. I auditioned a couple of times for the Groundlings. Excuse me. And back in those days, it wasn't like it is today, where if you're not well known, you're not going to get in the front door of the Groundlings. I mean, it's just that way anymore. And Second City in Chicago as well. But I tried to get in a number of times. It didn't work. And I was kind of sad one day. Anyway, to make a long story short, Robin Williams knew me a little bit. Was very kind, made a phone call, and a couple of days later I got a phone call to come in and audition again, and I was accepted into some classes, and boom, 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 2.5 years later, I'm still with him. And Robin was always a great friend and a kind gentleman, not only to me, but so many other actors out there that I just relished knowing him, even though I hadn't seen him in many years, and when he passed away, it saddened me to no end. It really saddened me to no end. You know how people come and go in your life, and that was one of them. But so yeah, when I talk to young actors and they say, "Oh, I'm going to L.A. or I'm going to New York or I'm going to Chicago," I say, "Well, I hope to God you have the experience, because they'll eat you alive out there. You know, there's nothing worse than getting up in front of a casting director and you spout out 2 words and they go next." Or you get up in front of a casting director for a commercial next, and you haven't even done anything except walk out there and hand a picture. It's the most nerve-wracking thing in the world. It's not for everybody, and you better have a thick skin like a rhino. That's all I've ever said. Go ahead.
I was going to say part of what I do as a manager is prepare people for meetings with agents.
Mm-hmm. It's tough.
And help introduce them to agents.
I never had that. I interviewed with a couple of agents out in Los Angeles to do voiceover work, and most of them enjoyed what I did, but they had rosters that were full of people that could do what I could do. You think coming from somewhere, I can do all these impersonations, and that's great. And I did get some work doing it, some cartoon work on Saturday mornings before the proliferation of the big names getting involved in this stuff.
Right.
But they had rosters full of people. You know that. I mean, you and I talked about it once before about, why am I not doing more voiceover work? The truth is that, I'm told 101 times, you got a broadcaster's voice. Where do young actors go nowadays to get the experience that they need to get to New York or L.A. or Chicago to talk to Seth Greenky and to talk to agents? Where, the soap operas are kind of, that used to be a nice proving ground, a training ground. That's down. They're all in L.A.
Right.
And those actors have years of experience, and I mean 10, 15, 20 years of experience, and they know the right people. Where do the young actors today get their experience? Is it with the off Broadway, the traveling shows that go around the country, and as well as in the colleges?
Well, I do very little with theater because there's very little money to be made with theater. You can make money with theater if you are a TV star or a film star, and you're willing to take a pay cut to $50,000 a week to do Broadway. But there are people who just, love the theater and will do that. And it's a good training ground. But if that's all you want to do, it's going to be hard to find a rep because they have to make a living. And they make a living from commissions that you make. So if you want to do theater, you better be prepared to do commercial work, commercial print work.
Right.
Basically, take most any legitimate job that comes your way to start building up your resume and to get casting directors familiar with you. Because sometimes you can audition for a show and a casting director will see you. If the casting director sees you a second time, maybe 3-4 weeks after the first audition, and they're seeing you for a different role, well, then you know that you didn't stink up the room the first time you went there.
Yes.
So, but a good way for a new person to get started, as I just did with one of my new signees, her name is Julia DiVirgilio. I introduced her to a fairly big commercial agency, and they really liked her. And before she went in, I gave her some tips on audition tips, how to audition for an agent, and what they look for and what's expected. And so there was very good chemistry, and the agent called me and said she loved her and is going to start sending her out as soon as she finds the appropriate commercials to send her out for.
That's
so
good.
Maybe she can start building a commercial reel, get comfortable in front of the camera, and then we will have that as sort of our starter kit.
That's great. You and I talked about this the other day, why I don't go out and do commercial stuff. It's because I look too much like Jay Leno. And they all go, look, Gary, you're really good, but I can't have Jay Leno in a commercial. We're not paying for Jay Leno in a commercial. Is the look everything when it comes to a commercial reel, that mom and pop next door kind of a thing, like Flo with Progressive Insurance? She just looks like your neighbor next door. I mean, is that extremely important nowadays when it comes to a commercial?
She's not my neighbor next door. She's creepy.
But I mean, is that important? The mom and pop, the little kids next door, the dog, the kitty, the whole bit. I mean, is that extremely important?
Well, that's proof that not everybody has to be extremely handsome or gorgeous. Character types are very good especially for commercials. Your everyday person.
And therefore, that you can make and there's a lot of actors you see that do make a very, very good living. When Law and Order was in their heyday, I understand. I don't know this to be true, but I understand there was schools out there teaching the Law and Order style of acting. Did you come across any of that?
No, I did not. But basically, in the 90s and the early part of this 20th century, if you didn't have Law and Order on your resume, what kind of actor were you?
Yeah,
but it's really good shows like that because they use a lot of people. And you were talking about the soaps, people getting their start. Well, you have your police procedurals or even your comedies that may use 5, 6, 7, 10 co-stars, where you have 5 lines or less.
Right.
You have it under 5.
Yeah.
And that's good to get. And if you can get one of those under your belt that goes on your resume, and you have your reel where maybe you're talking to one of the protagonists, the lead actors, and again, you start building.
Yeah. That's how I started when I was in L.A. Stephen Boschko, who was one of my teachers at Carnegie Mellon, saw me performing. I didn't even know he was out there. And next thing you know, I'm doing 5 and Under stuff on Hill Street Blues and St. Elsewhere and some of the other productions that he had. And even Stephen Canale used me for once in a while because his offices were down the street from where I lived. But I wasn't a great actor. If I was, I'd still be at it, obviously, instead of having my talk show, which I love to do anyway. What are some of the reasons why you would not continue with an artist? You'd say, look, we've run our course here. I think it's time for you to move on. I need to move on, etc.
Oftentimes, they don't work as hard as I do. I recently decided after almost a full 3 years, I just kept waiting for the spark that would go on that seemed to be there when we started. But if an actor is not calling you up and saying, hey, I've got new headshots for you. Hey, I just did a student film. Can I show it to you? Or, gee, I haven't had an audition for 3 weeks. Are you getting me out there? Can I meet another agent? If I don't hear from you, to me, it's like, you don't care.
Yeah.
I've had clients that would just shoot, even with a friend, they take headshot sessions or lifestyle sessions. They just take pictures, and maybe out of 100, you might get 2 good ones. I mean, not even with a professional, but they were constantly sending me new pictures to look at and say, what more can I do? What else can I do to help you? And that's what any representative needs. You don't have to be calling up every day and say, how come I haven't had an audition for 3 weeks? Well, sometimes you go 3 months without one.
Yeah.
But at least act like you care.
Right. Do you think that people out there, young people today, even older adult actors, don't understand the word show business, that it's like 15, 20% show and the rest is business, that they don't understand? They have to do their homework and they have to.
This is not a hobby for me. This is not a hobby for me. This is how I send allowance to my grandson in college and pay my mortgage. I need people who are hard workers, and when they have the opportunity, they don't call up. And if they have an audition, they don't say, gee, can you change the time? Auditions are like gifts.
Yes.
You get them from the casting director. The casting director notifies the agent notifies me. I notify the talent. And then if the talent can't go when assigned, it sets off a daisy chain of phone calls and events, and it just drives everybody nuts.
Have you had actors that have done that to you, where they say, oh, I've got to be here on Thursday for a hair appointment. Can you change that to a different time?
If it's rare, I will accommodate because I can say to the agent, she's never had to cancel or change in the last 2 years. Can we do it this time? Mm-hmm. Okay, sure. But if it's constant, you're just going to alienate everybody because we can't get our business done. We're too busy rearranging auditions, and then when you have to change a time, it goes back to the agent. The agent has to go back. The agent might have 2 or 3 people also going in, and then the casting director has to call up somebody and say, can you switch your 10:30 for the 2 p.m.? And then they have to get back through their representatives. Right. So it just costs so much time that if you do that with any frequency, you simply will not get called again.
We talked about this on the phone the other day, and it stems from the trailer that I've seen on television for the new movie Ted 2, which is absolutely hilarious. Everybody who's seen it so far seems to enjoy the previews of it. How is it for minorities today in TV and film as compared to what it was 15, 20 years ago? I mean, and the reason I bring that up, it's because, and you and I both commented, the line is something to the effect of Ted's attorney, Samantha L. Jackson. He goes, Samuel L. Jackson, and she didn't know who that was. And he goes, well, you go to the movies? Yeah. You see the black guy in there? He's the black guy in every movie. Is that a problem as well?
It's hyperbolic but funny.
Yeah, it is. Is it gotten easier for minorities? I know on Broadway there's a lot of opportunities for minority actors of all kinds, blacks, Asians, et cetera, Hispanics. Has it gotten easier for minorities in the television and film business?
That would depend on who you ask, I suppose. But insofar as I'm concerned, when I have a client who is an ethnic minority, whether black, Asian, Hispanic, if the role does not specify blonde, blue-eyed, I will submit, and the agents will submit colorblind, because who knows, they may have enough of white people and they want to sprinkle in more diversity. And then vice versa. There are a lot of shows like, the names escape me at the moment, is it Blackish? And anything that Tyler Perry does, the casting on that is 90% minority. This is not to say that in the early days of UPN network, to me it felt like segregated TV.
Right.
And I don't think that's the way it should be, and I don't think, but it did open up a lot of doors for people who might not have gotten a look-see. So I will submit somebody for any role as long as they're the right age or body type or have the proper skill.
And
there was a time when pardon me.
Go ahead.
They were casting something for one of the soaps, and it was the time that Friends was on TV, and they wanted to have somebody who was like Phoebe from Friends. So everybody submitted their kind of goofy blonde people, and the person who got the role happened to be African American.
Huh.
So, if you got what they like, or you showed them something different, as long as you're not going too far out of the parameter, okay, but don't send them, a 40-year-old, 200-pound guy who's 5'8" when he's supposed to be the alluring housewife.
Yeah, and I've seen that happen so many times, where the miscasting or somebody's been sent, and you look around the room and you go, I look nothing like these people that are sitting here. I'm not blonde hair, blue eyed. I'm dark haired at the time when I was really pursuing it in L.A. Blue eyed, but I look nothing like this. But then again, you got to give yourself a chance, because in The Graduate,
if you've been called in, there's a reason for it.
Yeah, because when it came to The Graduate, they were actually looking for a Troy Donahue type for the part that Dustin Hoffman got, but he got it. I mean, which was great. I mean, sometimes miscasting can really happen. We have only got a little bit of time left, Seth. The hour has gone by.
I want to go back on something. When we were talking about under fives and getting started, we are not talking about extra work.
No, absolutely
that's all
not.
I want to make clear.
Oh no,
okay.
But that's how I got started in South Florida, because Beverly McDermott was. I went to school with her son Rick, and that's how I used to get a lot of work during the summer on movies and stuff that were being filmed in Miami and Hollywood, Florida, etc., or even around the country. If she had something to do with it, Rick and I would get jobs as extras, and we'd earn a good, for kids that are 13, 14, and 15 years old. You'd earn a nice couple of for 3 or 4 or 5 days or even 2 weeks, and you'd do other things on the set. So it was always fun to do it, and I've always loved the business. And of course, my Uncle Tubby was in it for so many years. But we are just about out of time. We're down to the final minute, and I just wanted to say thank you, Seth Greenky, for joining us tonight. Seth is one of the top managers in the business. I've known Seth for a considerable amount of time, and it's always been a joy to have him, and not only to talk on the show, but also as my friend. And I just want to thank everybody out there for tuning in to tonight's show. It's really been fun to do this show. And please, next week we have Headlines with Mark Viola. If you want to Facebook me on The Express, it's Gary Allen, The Express. Seth is one of my friends on my Facebook. And I just want to say thank you to everybody out there for taking a few minutes out of your day to join us. And Seth, is there anything you want to say before we get on out of here?
Thank you, Gary. It's been fun.
It has been, and of course, I'm going to have Seth back. And again, next week, Mark Viola will be joining us. Everybody, please have a very safe and sound weekend, the 4th of July. But please remember those who sacrificed the ultimate sacrifice for you and I to enjoy days like the 4th of July and our founding fathers. So until then, until next week, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Good night.
You've been listening to The Express with Gary Allen. Join us here every Tuesday night at 10 for more captivating talk with Gary Allen. See you next time on The Express.